We live in a world obsessed with control. Everywhere we look, we're taught to plan, to manage, to force things into order. We control our time, our image, our relationships, even our emotions. As if life were a machine that could be tuned into perfection. But behind that desire to control lies something deeper: fear. Fear that if we let go, everything will fall apart. Fear that if we don't hold on tightly enough, we will lose what we love. Carl Jung understood this fear better than most. He saw that the human ego is always trying to play God, to decide what is right, what must happen, and when. But he also saw that life does not belong to the ego. It belongs to something far greater, something he called the self. The self is not the mask we wear. Not the voice that says, "I know exactly what I'm doing." It's the deeper intelligence that breathes through us. The unseen order shaping our days, our encounters, and our growth. When we try to control everything, we separate ourselves from that intelligence. We build walls against uncertainty. But in doing so, we also block life's spontaneous beauty. Jung once wrote, "We do not solve our problems, we grow into them." Control is not a cure for chaos, it's a refusal to grow. Because the truth is, every struggle, every disruption, is an invitation to evolve into who we truly are. To control life is to mistrust it. To let go is to participate in its wisdom. Imagine trying to command a river to flow straight. You can build dams and walls, but the water will always find another path. The more you resist it, the more it breaks you. But when you release control, when you float, you find that the river already knows the way. Jung believed that this is the essential spiritual task of every person: to surrender the ego's illusion of control, and listen instead to the quiet movement of the soul. This does not mean giving up. It means giving space. Space for life to move through you rather than against you. Because what you call chaos might be the very pattern your deeper self is creating. So, ask yourself, how much of your suffering comes from life itself? And how much comes from your attempt to control it? The more you let go, the more you realize. Control was never safety. It was a cage. Freedom begins when you stop trying to dominate life and start aligning with it. The ego believes that surrender is weakness. But Jung knew that surrender is the only path to real strength. Because once you release the need to control, you discover the quiet power of trust. Trust in life, in timing, in the deeper intelligence that has always guided you. And that is where peace begins. Not when everything is certain, but when you no longer need it to be. Carl Jung often said that what we call chaos is rarely chaotic. It only appears that way to the mind that insists on understanding everything. But underneath what looks like confusion or misfortune, there is an order, one that belongs not to the conscious mind, but to what he called the unconscious. The unconscious is not merely a storehouse of forgotten memories or suppressed fears. It is a living system, vast, intelligent, and mysterious. It shapes our dreams, our instincts, our sudden impulses to act or create. It brings us together with certain people, leads us toward unexpected experiences, and even arranges the timing of our lives. When things seem to fall apart, when events happen outside our control, the ego sees only disorder. But Jung believed that the unconscious may be guiding us toward exactly what we need to confront. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." To the conscious mind, fate looks like a cruel joke. A series of accidents that happened to us. But to Jung, fate was simply the unconscious trying to express itself through the fabric of our daily lives. Every disappointment, every unexpected ending, every painful detour you didn't plan, is the psyche's way of rebalancing itself. It's life's attempt to pull you back into wholeness, even when your ego resists. Think about how often your greatest growth came from moments you never asked for. The times you lost something important, a job, a person, a dream, and only later realized that what replaced it was closer to who you truly are. Jung believed that the unconscious is always moving us toward wholeness. It has its own timing, its own rhythm, its own laws. To live wisely is not to control this process, but to listen to it. When the mind is silent, when you stop demanding answers and start observing your life, you begin to notice small signs, patterns, coincidences, subtle feelings of direction. They are not accidents. They are the unconscious speaking in its own language. You might call it intuition. You might call it destiny. Jung called it the voice of the self. This voice cannot be forced. It cannot be predicted or rationalized. It reveals itself only when you are humble enough to stop commanding life and start cooperating with it. To trust the unconscious is to acknowledge that you do not see the full picture. It is to accept that mystery has a role in your life. It is to believe that even in confusion, there is intelligence, and that perhaps the parts of you that you do not yet understand are already guiding you toward balance. You may not know why you feel drawn to a certain path. You may not understand why something had to end. But Jung would say, you are being directed, not by logic, not by chance, but by a deeper purpose that your ego cannot yet perceive. The unconscious does not ask for your control. It asks for your attention. It asks for your faith. It asks you to stop struggling and start listening. Because it is always speaking, always shaping, always creating the conditions for your growth. And when you finally stop trying to manage every moment, you begin to see the pattern unfold. Not a pattern of perfection, but of deep, living harmony. This is the second lesson. You are not in control, but you are always being guided. There is a misunderstanding that has followed humanity for centuries. The belief that to surrender is to lose. That to let go means to give up. Carl Jung saw through this illusion. He knew that surrender is not an act of defeat. It is an act of alignment. Because life will not obey the will of a fearful ego. It flows according to its own intelligence. And the more we resist, the more we suffer. When people hear the word surrender, they think of passivity. They imagine weakness, helplessness, resignation. But Jung's form of surrender was none of these things. It was awareness, the courage to stop fighting what is real. To surrender is to stop demanding that life be different. It is to stop arguing with what is. It is to stop pretending that control brings safety. Because it never has. Jung wrote, "What you resist persists." He meant that whatever you fight within yourself, fear, sadness, uncertainty, or pain, only gains more power through your resistance. But when you accept it, when you allow it to exist, it begins to lose its hold. That is the paradox of surrender. You stop running, and suddenly you are free. Think about the moments when you were most exhausted. When your plans failed, your expectations collapsed, and there was nothing left to control. At first, there was fear. Then, something quieter arrived. A stillness, a small voice that whispered, "You don't have to fight anymore." That voice is not weakness. It is wisdom. When Jung went through his own crisis, the period he called his confrontation with the unconscious, he stopped trying to direct his life according to reason. He began to listen inwardly. He drew, he wrote, he dreamed. He allowed the deeper images of his psyche to rise without censorship. That act of surrender became the foundation of his life's work. It takes great strength to let life move through you rather than to command it. It takes courage to stand in uncertainty and say, "I do not understand this, but I will stay open." Surrender means trusting that there is meaning even in what you do not yet comprehend. It means acknowledging that pain, endings, and confusion are not punishments, they are teachers. They are the psyche's way of guiding you back to wholeness. To surrender is to let the storm pass through you, knowing that you are not the storm. You are the sky behind it. Unmoved. Expansive. Still. Jung believed that when you release control, something remarkable happens. The deeper self begins to take shape. The unconscious and the conscious start to communicate. And your life becomes less about force and more about flow. This is not a surrender of power. It is the beginning of true power. Because only when you stop clinging to what must go can you open to what is meant to arrive. When you stop trying to dominate the river, you discover its rhythm, and it carries you to places the ego could never have reached alone. So ask yourself, where in your life are you still trying to control what wants to unfold? Where are you still forcing outcomes out of fear? What might happen if, just for a moment, you stop trying to hold it all together and allowed life to breathe through you? Surrender is not the end of control. It is the beginning of trust. And trust, Jung reminds us, is where transformation truly begins. There is a quiet strength that emerges when you stop trying to make life happen, and instead allow life to happen through you. Carl Jung believed that this is the natural state of harmony between the conscious and the unconscious. A cooperation between your will and the will of something far greater than yourself. Most people live as if life is an obstacle course to be conquered. They set goals, chase outcomes, and measure their worth by how much they can achieve. But Jung would say that this approach leaves the soul gasping for air. Because the soul does not move in straight lines. It moves in circles, in patterns, in symbols, in the quiet unfolding of meaning. Letting life happen through you means loosening the boundaries of control. It means acting, but without attachment. It means working, creating, loving, speaking, and striving, but without the desperate need to predict or possess what comes next. There is a phrase Jung used often: the spirit of the depths. He contrasted it with the spirit of this time, the modern, rational, controlling part of the mind. The spirit of the depths, he said, speaks through dreams, intuition, and synchronicities. It cannot be commanded. It only responds to receptivity. When you let life happen through you, you shift from striving to allowing. You begin to sense when to act and when to be still. You start to notice how events unfold with quiet intelligence, as if the universe were arranging things on your behalf. It is not a fantasy. It is the natural rhythm of an integrated psyche. A human being no longer ruled by the tyranny of should, but guided by the pulse of being itself. When Jung spoke of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole, he described it as a kind of inner cooperation. The conscious mind listens to the unconscious, and the unconscious responds by sending symbols, images, and intuition. This dialogue becomes your compass. And when you honor it, your life begins to feel guided. The right ideas come when you stop forcing them. The right people appear when you stop chasing them. The right answers rise when you stop demanding them. Letting life happen through you does not mean doing nothing. It means doing from a place of stillness, allowing your actions to emerge from awareness rather than anxiety. This kind of living feels different. There is less friction, less urgency, more trust. You stop pushing time forward and begin to walk with it. Jung wrote that the self, the totality of who you are, is always seeking expression through you. Your task is not to invent that expression but to remove what blocks it. Control blocks it. Fear blocks it. Doubt blocks it. But presence, quiet, trusting, receptive presence, allows it to flow. When life moves through you, you become a vessel rather than a commander. You stop saying, "I must make this happen," and instead whisper, "I will let what wants to happen, happen through me." That is how intuition deepens. That is how creativity becomes effortless. That is how meaning begins to arise naturally, without the strain of having to design it. This is the paradox Jung returned to again and again. When you surrender control, you gain alignment. When you stop insisting on your way, you find the way that was meant for you all along. To let life happen through you is to trust that even in stillness, you are being carried. And to realize that the deepest parts of you, the unseen, the unplanned, the quiet, are already shaping the person you are becoming. Letting life happen through you is not withdrawal. It is the highest form of participation, because you are no longer fighting against the flow of existence. You have become part of it. The moment you begin to let go, the ego becomes afraid. It senses its control slipping, and it whispers warnings. If you stop trying, you'll lose everything. If you let go, your life will fall apart. If you don't fight, you'll be forgotten. Carl Jung understood this voice. He knew that the ego's fear of chaos is one of the greatest obstacles to peace. Because the ego survives by maintaining the illusion that it is in charge. It believes that if it can control reality, it can protect itself from pain. But in truth, this constant vigilance is the pain. The ego fears chaos because it cannot predict it. It cannot label it, plan it, or master it. So it calls it dangerous. It calls it failure. But Jung saw something deeper. That what the ego calls chaos, the soul calls transformation. When life disrupts your plans, when everything feels uncertain, you are not being punished. You are being reoriented. The structures that once held you are being dismantled, so that something new can grow in their place. Jung often used the image of alchemy to describe this process. The ancient art of turning base metals into gold. He said that the psyche works in the same way. It breaks down what is rigid and impure within us, so that something luminous can emerge. But to the ego, this process feels like destruction, because it is the destruction of the false self. The masks, the control, the certainty. And so, the ego resists. It clings to its routines, its identities, its judgments. It says, I am the one who decides. But no matter how tightly it holds on, life will always move according to a deeper order. The more you fight this order, the more disoriented you become. The irony is that the ego's attempt to protect itself from chaos creates more of it. Because the harder you try to control the uncontrollable, the more exhausted and fragmented you feel. Jung called this psychic tension, the friction between the ego's will and the unconscious will of the self. This is why true healing often begins when control fails. When plans collapse, when identities dissolve, when everything the ego depends on stops working. That is when the deeper self finally has room to speak. The chaos the ego fears is not the end. It is the beginning. It is the breaking of a shell that has outgrown its purpose. It is the sound of old certainties cracking open, so that a wider truth can enter. If you look back on your life, you'll see that the moments you called chaotic were often the very moments that forced you to awaken. They stripped you of pretense. They humbled you. They made you real. Jung would say that chaos is not your enemy. It is your initiation. It is the fire that burns away illusion. It is the teacher that reminds you that you were never in control to begin with. And once you stop fearing that fire, you begin to understand it. You begin to see that life has always been creating order through apparent disorder, teaching you to trust in what you cannot yet understand. So the next time something unravels, pause before calling it chaos. Look closer. It might be your transformation taking shape in disguise. Because the ego sees only loss. But the self always sees renewal. And it is in this very tension, between what falls apart and what begins again, that the real work of the soul unfolds. Jung taught that the greatest wisdom lies not in forcing life to conform to our plans, but in learning to trust the flow that moves through us. This flow is subtle, often hidden beneath the noise of the ego. But it is always present, guiding, shaping, and directing us toward what we need to grow. To trust the inner flow is to accept that life has a rhythm. One that does not bend to fear or desire. It is a rhythm that the mind cannot always anticipate. And yet, it carries us exactly where we are meant to be. Think of it as a river running through your existence. The conscious mind is like a small boat trying to navigate its waters. The ego wants to row and steer at every moment, straining against the current to follow a pre-planned course. The inner flow, however, knows the bends and currents, the deep pools and hidden channels, and it moves with a natural intelligence the mind cannot match. When you trust the inner flow, you stop resisting life's currents. You stop trying to control every interaction, every outcome, every feeling. Instead, you allow yourself to be carried, guided by the invisible intelligence that is already orchestrating your growth. Jung wrote that this is the path of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole. Individuation is not about creating yourself from scratch. but uncovering the self that already exists, and allowing it to express itself through your life. The ego resists this process because it fears unpredictability. But the deeper self moves only in freedom. Trusting the inner flow does not mean ignoring responsibility. It does not mean avoiding action. It means aligning your actions with what feels authentic and necessary, instead of forcing outcomes that the universe has not yet revealed. It means responding rather than reacting, observing rather than controlling, listening rather than commanding. In moments of uncertainty, the ego will whisper, "Do something, do anything, or you will fail." The inner flow, however, speaks softly. "Be present. Observe. Wait. Act when it is right." This is a subtle but profound difference. The ego acts out of fear, the self acts out of trust. The ego wants control, the self wants harmony. The ego measures success, the self honors the process. As you practice trusting the inner flow, you will notice subtle signs. A thought that appears suddenly, offering clarity. A feeling that guides your decision. A synchronistic encounter that confirms your direction. These are not coincidences. They are the language of the unconscious. The whisper of the self steering your life gently, unseen. Jung reminded us that surrendering to this flow is not passivity. It is a courageous engagement with life. A willingness to participate in the unfolding without insisting that it unfold according to your plan. It is the art of living in harmony with yourself, and with the deeper currents that shape your destiny. To trust the inner flow is to release the exhausting burden of constant control. And in doing so, discover a freedom that the ego can never imagine. It is here, in this quiet trust, that you begin to feel the unfolding of life as a partner, rather than an adversary. And it is here, Jung teaches, that you begin to know true strength. The strength of a mind and heart in alignment with the vast, unseen intelligence that moves silently beneath the surface of existence. There comes a moment in every inner journey when striving softens into stillness. When all the lessons, of surrender, of shadow, of patience, converge into a quiet realization that nothing more needs to be done. That life, in its unpredictable unfolding, was never against you. It was only teaching you how to see. Jung believed that healing is not found in the elimination of conflict, but in the reconciliation of opposites. To return to the self is to hold light and darkness, strength and vulnerability, joy and sorrow, together, without resistance. It is to stop demanding perfection from yourself or from life. To look upon your experiences, both beautiful and painful, and finally say, "Yes, this too is me." Calm acceptance is not resignation. It is the peace that comes from no longer fighting what already is. It is standing in the middle of your life, with all its noise, its silence, its imperfection, and realizing that you are whole, even here. Even when no one understands you. Even when the path seems uncertain. Even when nothing goes according to plan. This is the essence of Jung's teaching. That the self you have been searching for was never lost. Only hidden beneath layers of control, expectation, and fear. When those layers fall away, what remains is not emptiness, but clarity. Not weakness, but stillness. Not loneliness, but communion with something infinitely larger than yourself. To return to the self is to recognize that life's wisdom cannot be owned or directed. It can only be received. It is to listen to the voice beneath thought, the one that speaks in intuition, dreams, and quiet knowing. It is to live with awareness rather than analysis, with presence rather than perfection. You will begin to notice that the more you let go of control, the more life begins to move harmoniously around you. People come and go in perfect timing. Opportunities appear when you stop forcing them. Answers arrive when you stop demanding them. And peace settles in not as an achievement, but as a natural byproduct of inner alignment. The true self is not reached by climbing higher, but by sinking deeper, beneath ambition, beneath fear, beneath the restless ego that believes it must earn its place in the world. The self was never missing. It was waiting for you to stop trying to control everything long enough. To finally feel what has been guiding you all along. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that becoming does not happen through force, but through acceptance. Through the willingness to meet yourself exactly where you are. Without judgment, without resistance. In calm acceptance, life no longer feels like something to manage, but something to move with. A conversation, a rhythm, a dance between your soul and the unfolding moment. You no longer ask, 'What should I do?' but rather, 'What is life asking of me right now?' And in that question you find peace. To return to the self is to stop searching for peace as a destination, and begin recognizing it as your natural state. It is not out there in future success or understanding. It is here, in this quiet breath, in this surrender, in this stillness. And when you reach this space, you no longer need control. Because you finally realize you were never in control to begin with. You were always being carried. If you've listened this far, you've likely felt it, that subtle shift somewhere deep within. It's not the voice of the mind analyzing or judging, but the quiet pulse of something older, wiser. Something that doesn't need to explain itself. That is the self-awakening, not as an idea, but as an experience. Carl Jung never promised that peace would come through control. He promised that peace would come through meaning. Through the courage to face your unconscious, to look at what you fear, and to recognize that it, too, belongs to you. The human instinct is to grasp, to manage, to predict. But the soul, the deeper part of us, asks only that we trust. Trust that what falls away was never meant to remain. Trust that what feels like an ending is simply another form of becoming. And trust that life, in its mystery, knows more than your plans ever could. There will be moments when silence feels heavy, when solitude tastes bitter, when it seems that no one understands the quiet battle you carry inside. In those moments, remember, the task is not to escape them, but to sit within them until they teach you. For it is in the dark that the psyche reveals its most sacred light. Jung often spoke of the individuation process, the lifelong path of becoming whole. It is not a linear journey, not a ladder of self-improvement, but a spiral inward, a deepening of consciousness. You do not arrive at the self. You remember it, again and again, in the spaces between striving and surrender. To live from that place is to let go of the illusion of control. It is to say, "I do not know what tomorrow will bring, but I trust that whatever comes, I will meet it with awareness." It is to understand that strength is not dominance, it is presence. It is not about bending life to your will, but learning to bend with it. When you stop trying to control everything, you make room for life to surprise you. You make room for grace, the quiet alignment that comes when your will and life's will finally meet. And that, Jung would say, is the moment you truly begin to live, not as a collection of goals or fears, but as a consciousness unfolding, moment by moment. So take this breath. Feel the weight in your body, the rhythm of your heart, the stillness underneath your thoughts. Here, in this small pause, you are closer to truth than any philosophy can offer. Because this silent, unforced presence, is the self Jung spoke of. You don't need to control what comes next. You don't need to predict how it will unfold. You only need to stay awake to it. In the words of Jung himself, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And perhaps, that is what surrender really means. To stop controlling, and start becoming. If this journey through Jung's wisdom has stirred something quiet within you, a new awareness, a deeper calm, hold on to it gently. You don't have to rush back into the noise of the world. Just breathe, and let these thoughts settle like dust in morning light. Remember, strength is not found in control. It's found in the courage to trust what is unfolding, to meet life as it comes, and to walk through it with open eyes. If this video spoke to you, let it stay with you for a while. Reflect, journal, or simply sit with yourself in silence. The work of the soul is done in stillness, not in haste. Thank you for listening, and for going deeper into the space where the mind quiets. and the self begins to speak. This is Deep Within. Until next time, be gentle with your becoming.